Hey, it's surfing, Victorian Surf Report, Monday the 20th of July, 2026. G'day and welcome to Hey, it's surfing. We're taking a look right around the Victorian coastline for Monday the 20th of July, covering the Surf Coast and Mornington Peninsula, Phillip Island and the Bass Coast, and then right through to East Gippsland. Today is offering clean winter conditions across much of the state, but the swell that delivered quality waves over the weekend is beginning to fade. The surf coast remains the safest option for overall quality, while the exposed beaches of Mornington and Phillip Island should carry a little more size. Then looking further ahead, we have a fresh frontal system approaching Victoria. That change will rebuild the swell from Wednesday into Thursday, but it will also bring strong westerly winds, showers and much rougher conditions. Let's get into it. Statewide overview. A high pressure system is moving east from Victoria and into the Tasman Sea today. Across central Victorian waters, winds are forecast to remain northwesterly at around 15 to 20 knots. The dominant swell is from the southwest at around 1 to 1.5 metres, increasing to 1.5 to 2 metres through the far west. That means the open coastline west of Torquay will retain reasonable size, while the protected reefs closer to town will be considerably smaller. The important detail today is the remaining swell period. There is still some long period energy in the water, generally between 13 and 16 seconds around the surf coast and the exposed central beaches. So even though the average wave height is falling, the stronger pulses can still produce noticeably larger and more powerful set waves. Surf Coast and Torquay, starting on the Surf Coast, and this remains the best overall region for quality today. Torquay Point should be sitting around the 2 to 3 foot range with smaller waves through the most protected sections of the bay. Bells Beach and Winkipop should be closer to 2 to 4 feet, with the possibility of the occasional larger set when the remaining ground swell pulses arrive. The fully exposed beaches and reefs west of Bells should carry more size, generally around 3 to 5 feet. Northwesterly winds are offshore for the established Torquay reefs, so surface conditions should remain clean. The wind may become fairly strong, however, particularly through the middle of the day. That can make smaller waves harder to paddle into, and it may push surfers away from the takeoff zone during the quieter periods. For Torquay and the Surf Coast, the best window is from early morning through to late morning. The tide is falling through the first half of the day. Using Lorne as the regional tide reference, high tide was around 3:44 this morning. Low tide arrives at approximately 9:22, followed by another high at around 4:02 this afternoon. The lower morning tide should add definition to the reefs, but it will also expose more rock and sharpen some of the shallow sections. Later in the afternoon, the rising tide may improve consistency, although the wind is likely to be stronger. For the more experienced crew, Bells and Winkipop should still have enough energy to be worthwhile. For immediate surfers, Torquay Point and the more protected reefs offer the cleaner and more manageable options. The main hazards are slippery rock entries, exposed reef on the lower tide, strong offshore wind and occasional larger sets arriving after long quiet periods. The Surf Coast gets a 7 out of 10 today. Clean and worthwhile, but smaller and less consistent than the weekend. Moving across to the Mornington Peninsula, and the exposed back beaches should retain a little more size. Gunnamatta, St Andrews and Rye Back Beach should generally be around 3 to 4 feet, with some occasional larger waves at the better exposed banks. Portsea Back Beach may reach 4 to 5 feet on the stronger pulses. The swell direction remains southwest, with the longer period component still close to 16 seconds around the exposed peninsula coastline. That longer period is important. The beach may look relatively calm between sets, but the stronger lines will contain more power and may break farther outside than expected. Winds are north to northwesterly and therefore offshore to cross offshore most of the peninsula's open beaches. The faces should be clean, but the 15 to 20 knot offshore wind can become quite strong, particularly on the smaller waves. The best opportunity will be during the morning before the breeze becomes more forceful. Using Point Lonsdale as the broad oceanside tide reference, high tide was around 4 this morning. Low tide arrives at approximately 9:44, followed by a high at 4:30 this afternoon. The fall in morning tide may expose better defined sandbanks, but it can also increase the strength of rips through the deeper gutters. Gunnamatta remains highly dependent on bank quality. One section may offer clean open walls, while another section, only a few hundred metres away, could be closing out or heavily swept. Flinders in the western port side will be much smaller. Some protected reefs may only reach 1 to 2 feet, but they will offer calmer water for surfers who do not want the power or current of the open beaches. Main hazards around Mornington are strong rips, offshore wind, shallow sandbanks, near low tide, and clean conditions disguising the amount of water moving through the surf zone. The peninsula gets a 6.5 out of 10 with its rating. There should be quality available, but finding the right bank will make all the difference. Phillip Island and the Bass Coast. Across Phillip Island, Woolamai and the open Bass Coast should provide another solid option. Woolamai is expected to sit around 3 to 5 feet with a southwest swell period generally around 12 to 14 seconds. Forest Caves should be slightly smaller, while Smiths Beach and Surfers Point are more likely to sit between 1 to 3 feet. The protected western end of the island will be smaller again. Winds inside Western Port are forecast to remain north to northwesterly at around 10 knots. At Woolamai, that direction is cross offshore. It should keep the faces relatively clean, although there may still be some lateral drift through the lineup. The best window is from first light through to middle of the morning. Low tide arrives around 10:41, followed by a strong afternoon high of just over 3 metres at approximately 5:29. That is a considerable tidal movement. Expect strong flow around Western Port entrances, channels and reef systems as the tide changes. At Woolamai, the lower late morning tide may help expose the shape of the banks, but it can also make some sections shallow and increase the strength of the sweep. Kilcunda and the more exposed Bass Coast beaches may carry similar or slightly larger surf than Woolamai, but conditions there are generally less refined, with stronger currents and fewer sheltered alternatives. Cape Patterson and Inverloch will be smaller and more manageable. The main hazards are deep gutters, strong lateral sweep, changing currents around Western Port and isolated larger sets at the most exposed beaches. Phillip Island and the Bass Coast get a 6.5 out of 10 today. Moving further east, East Gippsland is dealing with a mixed swell field. The Bureau is forecasting a fading southerly swell around 1 to 1.5 metres, decreasing toward 1 metre during the morning. There is also a secondary northeasterly swell around 1 metre inshore and up to 1.5 metres further out offshore. Around Lake's entrance, the surf should remain small, generally around 1 to 2 feet. 90 Mile Beach may reach 1 to 3 feet depending on local exposure. Cape Conran, Marlow and the more exposed far eastern beaches should offer the greatest chance of size, with occasional waves in the 2 to 4 foot range. Winds begin from the north to northwest at around 10 to 15 knots, reaching 20 knots in part of the far east. They should become lighter and more variable later in the day. That makes late morning through the afternoon the most promising window, particularly if the early northerly becomes too strong. At Lake's entrance, low tide is around 6:58 this morning. High tide arrives at approximately 1:39 this afternoon, followed by another low around 7:30 tonight. The rising tide may help the smaller beach breaks through the middle of the day. The main hazards are mixed swell directions, unpredictable peaks, and strong tidal movement near ocean entrances and bars. Even when the nearby beach surf appears small, bar conditions can remain dangerous. East Gippsland gets a 5.5 out of 10. There should be small waves around Lake's entrance with better potential further east. Looking ahead to Tuesday, conditions should remain relatively clean. Across central Victoria, northwesterly winds are forecast at 10 to 15 knots, reaching 20 knots offshore at times. The west to southwest swell remains around 1 to 1.5 metres inshore and up to 2 metres offshore. The surf coast will remain clean but fairly small. Mornington and Phillip Island should offer more size and may provide the better beach break conditions. Model guidance for Gunnamatta suggests a slightly stronger west to southwest pulse on Tuesday, with periods close to 14 seconds and northerly winds. That makes Tuesday morning one of the better opportunities for the peninsula's open beaches. Whereas Wednesday is the change day. A weak cold front crosses southern Victoria. Northwesterly winds strengthen to become 15 to 25 knots before turning westerly at around 20 to 25 knots during the afternoon. The southwest swell builds from 1 to 2 metres, reaching 2 to 3 metres by